The clock on the wall showed 8:47 p.m. when Lisa wiped down her fifth table of the evening shift. Her feet were killing her, and she still had 3 more hours to go before closing time. The fancy restaurant where she worked was always busy on Tuesday nights, but tonight felt different. There was an energy in the air that made her stomach twist with anxiety. Lisa had been working at this upscale place for 6 months now, ever since she dropped out of music school. The decision still hurt to think about, but her little brother needed surgery, and their mom couldn't handle the medical bills alone. Someone had to step up, and Lisa was the only one old enough to work full-time. She missed music more than she missed anything else in her life. Every morning when she woke up, her fingers would automatically move like she was playing piano, even though she hadn't touched real keys in months. The muscle memory was still there, waiting for a chance to come alive again. The restaurant was the kind of place where rich people came to eat food with names she couldn't pronounce. The menu had tiny portions that cost more than what she made in a day, but the tips were good when customers were happy, and she needed every dollar she could get. Tonight was supposed to be like any other night. Take orders, serve food, smile, even when her feet screamed for mercy, and count the tips at the end. But then he walked in. The man who entered wasn't just rich, he was famous rich. The kind of person whose face showed up on magazine covers and news websites. He owned tech companies and had more money than most small countries. Everyone in the restaurant recognized him immediately, including Lisa's manager, who practically ran across the room to greet him. The famous man brought 5 other people with him, all dressed in expensive clothes and carrying phones that probably cost more than Lisa's rent. They talked loudly about business deals and exotic vacations while the manager led them to the best table in the house, right next to the grand piano that sat in the corner. Lisa had always wondered why the restaurant kept that piano there. It was beautiful, with shiny black wood that reflected the fancy lights hanging from the ceiling. But nobody ever played it. It just sat there like expensive decoration, gathering dust while people ate their overpriced meals. The manager assigned Lisa to serve the famous man's table. Her hand shook a little as she approached them with water glasses and menus. These weren't her usual customers, middle managers celebrating promotions or couples on anniversary dates. These were people who could probably buy the entire restaurant without checking their bank accounts. "Good evening," Lisa said in her most professional voice. "Welcome to Romano's. Can I start you off with some appetizers tonight?" The famous man looked up from his phone and studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. His friends kept talking about some business meeting, but he seemed more interested in watching Lisa pour water into their glasses. "Do you work here long?" he asked suddenly, interrupting his friend's conversation. "About 6 months, sir," Lisa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded and looked over at the silent piano. "That thing work?" "The piano?" "Yes, sir, I believe so. But we don't usually have live music during dinner service." The famous man's eyes lit up with the kind of look that probably meant trouble for someone. Lisa had seen that expression before, on her little brother's face right before he did something that would get him in trouble with their mom. "You know how to play?" he asked, pointing at the piano. Lisa felt her cheeks get warm. She could feel the other people at the table turning to look at her, and customers at nearby tables were starting to listen to the conversation too. I used to study music, sir, but I'm just a waitress now. Would you like to hear about our specials tonight?" But the famous man wasn't interested in food anymore. He leaned back in his chair with a grin that made Lisa's stomach drop. "Here's what we're going to do," he said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "You're going to play something on that piano for us. If you're good enough to impress me, I'll pay for our entire table's bill and leave you a tip that'll make your month. But if you're not good enough," he paused for dramatic effect, "you work the rest of your shift for free. No tips from anybody." Lisa felt like the floor had disappeared from under her feet. The other customers were definitely listening now, and she could see her manager hurrying over with a worried expression. "Sir, I don't think that's really," Lisa started to say. "Come on," the famous man interrupted. "Where's your sense of adventure? You said you studied music. This is your chance to show what you've got." Lisa's manager arrived at the table just In time to hear the proposal, instead of protecting his employee, he looked at the famous man with dollar signs in his eyes. "What a wonderful idea," the manager said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Lisa would be happy to play for you. Wouldn't you, Lisa?" Lisa wanted to say no. She wanted to explain that she hadn't played piano in months, that her hands weren't warmed up, that this wasn't fair. But she could see the look on her manager's face, the look that said her job depended on keeping the famous customer happy. More than that, she thought about her little brother waiting at home for his next round of treatments. She thought about the medical bills piling up on their kitchen table. She thought about her mom working 2 jobs and still not having enough money to pay for everything they needed. "I suppose I could try," Lisa said quietly, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's background noise. The famous man clapped his hands together like he just won a game. "Excellent. This is going to be fun." But as Lisa looked at the piano, across the room she felt anything but fun. Her palms were sweating and her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She hadn't performed for anyone in almost a year. What if she'd forgotten how to play? What if her fingers didn't remember the songs that used to flow from them like water? The other customers in the restaurant had stopped eating and were watching the drama unfold. Some of them had their phones out, probably getting ready to record whatever happened next. Lisa realized that in a few minutes, she'd either be a viral video of success or failure. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the piano, each step feeling like it took forever. Behind her, she could hear the famous man telling his friends how much he loved discovering talent and making regular people prove themselves. Lisa reached the piano bench and sat down slowly. The keys looked exactly like she remembered, black and white, waiting for someone to bring them to life. She placed her hands on the smooth surface and felt a shock of recognition. It was like meeting an old friend after a long separation. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Lisa closed her eyes for just a moment and tried to remember who she used to be before life got complicated. She tried to remember the girl who dreamed of playing in concert halls and making music that could make people cry. Then she opened her eyes, looked down at the keys, and prepared to find out if that girl was still somewhere inside her. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the piano keys. The smooth, cold surface felt familiar yet foreign at the same time. It had been 8 months since she last played, and her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. Around her, the entire restaurant had fallen silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped clattering dishes to see what would happen. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her every move. The wealthy man sat back in his chair with a smug smile, clearly expecting to be entertained by what he thought would be an amateur's clumsy attempt. His friends had their phones ready to record, probably planning to share the moment on social media later. Lisa's manager stood near the kitchen door, wringing his hands nervously. She knew he was worried about losing such an important customer if things went badly. The other waitresses had gathered in the corner, whispering to each other and shooting her sympathetic looks. Taking a deep breath, Lisa tried to calm her racing heart. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to her childhood bedroom, where she used to practice for hours every day. Her old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, always told her students to start with something simple when they were nervous. "Just let the music flow through you," Mrs. Chen would say. "Don't think about the audience, think about the story you want to tell." Lisa opened her eyes and chose a piece she knew by heart, a gentle waltz by Chopin that she had played hundreds of times as a teenager. Her right hand found the melody while her left hand provided the steady rhythm. The first few notes came out hesitant and quiet, barely audible above the restaurant's air conditioning. But as she continued, something magical began to happen. Her muscle memory kicked in, and her fingers started to remember their old dance. Across the keys, the notes grew stronger and more confident with each measure. The beautiful melody filled the dining room, floating between the tables like an invisible thread connecting everyone present. Lisa felt her shoulders relax as the familiar piece took over. This was who she used to be. Not a tired waitress worried about tips and medical bills, but a musician who could make people feel things with just her fingertips and a set of keys. The wealthy man's smug expression began to change. His eyebrows raised slightly as he realized this wasn't going to be the embarrassing spectacle he had expected. The woman sitting next to him put down her wine glass and leaned forward, genuinely interested in the music. At a nearby table, an elderly couple stopped their quiet conversation to listen. The man reached across the table and took his wife's hand, both of them transported by the sweet melody. A businessman who had been aggressively typing on his laptop closed it and turned his chair to face the piano. Lisa could sense the shift in the room's energy, even though she kept her eyes focused on the keys. The atmosphere had changed from curious expectation to genuine appreciation. People weren't just watching anymore. They were listening, really listening. As she played the final notes of the Chopin waltz, a small round of applause broke out. It wasn't loud or enthusiastic, but it was real and warm. Lisa looked up for the first time since she had started playing and saw faces that looked surprised and pleased. The wealthy man sat straighter in his chair. His phone was still in his hand, but he had forgotten to record anything. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "that was actually pretty good. I wasn't expecting that." But Lisa wasn't finished. Something inside her had awakened, a part of herself that had been sleeping for months. Her hands moved to a different position on the keys and she began to play a more complex piece. This one was by Mozart, a sonata that required both hands to work independently, creating layers of melody that wove together like a musical conversation. The notes cascaded from the piano with increasing confidence. Lisa's posture straightened, and her movements became more fluid and natural. She was no longer the scared waitress who had reluctantly approached the piano. She was becoming the musician she used to be. The change was visible to everyone watching. Her manager's worried expression turned to amazement. The other customers had completely forgotten about their meals. Even the kitchen staff had emerged from behind the swinging doors to listen. The wealthy man leaned forward in his chair, his casual arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. He whispered something to the woman next to him, who nodded and whispered back. They were no longer treating this as entertainment. They were witnessing something unexpected and real. Lisa's fingers danced across the keys with growing passion. The Mozart piece was technically challenging, requiring precise timing and careful attention to dynamics. But her years of training came flooding back, and she navigated the difficult passages with grace and skill. A young couple at a corner table had stopped talking entirely and were holding hands while they listened. An older businessman had tears in his eyes, though he probably couldn't explain why. The music was doing something to people, reaching past their daily worries and touching something deeper. As the Mozart piece reached its conclusion, Lisa felt a surge of emotion she hadn't experienced in months. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for fame or money, but for this moment when notes became feelings, when technical skill transformed into human connection. But she wasn't ready to stop. Her heart was racing, but not from nervousness anymore, from joy, from the pure pleasure of making music again. Her hands moved to another position, and she began to play a piece that was closer to her heart, a beautiful, melancholy melody by Debussy that had always reminded her of rain falling on a quiet lake. The restaurant had become completely still, except for the piano. No one was eating, drinking, or talking. Even the air conditioning seemed to have quieted down. The only sound was Lisa's playing, each note clear and perfect in the hushed space. The wealthy man was no longer smiling smugly. His expression had become thoughtful, almost confused. This wasn't what he had planned when he made his casual challenge. He had expected to embarrass a waitress and create a moment of entertainment for his friends. Instead, he was witnessing something that made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite understand. Lisa lost herself completely in the Debussy piece. Her eyes closed again, and she let the music carry her away from the restaurant, away from her worries about money and medical bills, away from everything except the pure beauty of the moment. When she finished the piece, the silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the expectant quiet of people waiting for something to happen. It was the reverent silence of people who had just experienced something beautiful, and needed a moment to process it. The wealthy man cleared his throat, breaking the spell. That was actually quite impressive, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. But Lisa was already reaching for the next piece, her fingers finding their position on the keys. She had found her way back to herself, and she wasn't ready to let go just yet. Lisa's confidence had grown with each piece she played, but now she faced a decision that would change everything. She could stop here, accept whatever praise the wealthy man offered, and go back to serving tables. Or she could take a risk that might end in disaster. Her hands hovered over the keys as she thought about the piece that had always been closest to her heart. It was the same piece she had been preparing for her final audition at music school, the one she never got to perform. Because life got in the way, it was incredibly difficult, the kind of music that separated real pianists from people who just knew how to play. The wealthy man was already starting to clap, clearly thinking the performance was over. His friends were reaching for their phones, again probably ready to return to their previous conversations. The spell that Lisa's music had cast over the restaurant was beginning to break, but then Lisa made her choice. Instead of standing up and walking away, she placed her hands firmly on the keys and began to play something that would test every skill she had ever learned. The piece started quietly, almost like a whisper. It was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, No. 2, one of the most emotionally powerful and technically demanding pieces ever written. Most people had heard it in movies or commercials without knowing what it was, but they always remembered how it made them feel. The opening notes floated through the restaurant like a gentle breeze, soft and mysterious. Lisa's touch was delicate, coaxing beauty from each key with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering this exact moment. The wealthy man's hand froze halfway to his wine glass. Something in the music made him pause and really listen for the first time all evening. This wasn't just good playing. This was something extraordinary. As the piece developed, Lisa's hands moved with increasing intensity across the keyboard. The melody grew stronger and more passionate, telling a story of longing and hope that seemed to speak directly to everyone listening. Her years of training showed in every movement, the way her fingers curved perfectly over the keys, the way her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, the way she breathed with the music as if it were part of her heartbeat. The restaurant staff had completely abandoned their duties. Waitresses stood frozen with plates in their hands, cooks peered out from the kitchen doorway, and even the manager had forgotten to worry about unhappy customers. Everyone was caught up in the magic that Lisa was creating. At table 12, a middle-aged woman dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. She couldn't explain why the music was making her cry, but something about it reminded her of dreams she had given up long ago. Her husband reached across the table and squeezed her hand, understanding without words. The businessman who had closed his laptop earlier was leaning forward in his chair, completely absorbed. He had spent the day in meetings about profit margins and market shares, but this music reminded him why he had started his company in the first place, to create something beautiful and meaningful. Lisa was no longer playing for the wealthy man or his challenge. She was playing for herself, for her little brother waiting at home, for her mother working night shifts, for everyone who had ever had to choose between their dreams and their responsibilities. The music became her voice, saying everything she had never been able to put into words. The piece reached its first dramatic climax, and Lisa's hands flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and precision. The notes cascaded like water falling down a mountain, each one crystal clear despite the incredible pace. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, drowning out the traffic noise from the street and the hum of the air conditioning. People at nearby restaurants heard the music through the windows and stopped to listen. Pedestrians walking by slowed their pace, drawn by the beautiful sounds floating out into the night air. Even the delivery drivers making their rounds paused to figure out where such incredible music was coming from. Inside the restaurant, the transformation was complete. This wasn't a dining room anymore, it was a concert hall. The elegant tables and expensive wine became the backdrop for something much more valuable than money could buy. Lisa's face was streaked with tears, but she didn't stop playing. The emotions pouring out through her fingers were years in the making. All the sacrifices, all the dreams deferred, all the nights she had fallen asleep humming melodies she would never get to perform. Tonight she was performing them all. The wealthy man sat perfectly still, his earlier smugness completely gone. He was used to getting whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it, but this music was showing him something he couldn't buy or control. It was raw human talent mixed with years of hard work and sacrifice, and it was more powerful than anything in his bank account. His friends had put away their phones entirely. The woman next to him had tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have explained why. The businessman across from her was staring at Lisa with an expression of wonder, as if he was seeing a miracle happen right in front of him. The piece built toward its final, overwhelming climax. Lisa's entire body was involved now. Her shoulders, her back, even her breathing worked together to pull every possible ounce of emotion from the piano. The music became bigger than the instrument, bigger than the room, bigger than anything any of them had expected when the evening began. As she played the final section, something shifted in Lisa herself. All the months of exhaustion and worry seemed to lift away. She remembered who she really was underneath the uniform and the tired smiles. She was a musician. She was an artist. She was someone who could take 88 keys and turn them into pure magic. The last notes of the concerto rang out through the restaurant with the power of a cathedral bell. They seemed to hang in the air forever, echoing off the walls and settling into the hearts of everyone who heard them. When the final note faded away, the silence that followed was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was sacred. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Lisa sat at the piano with her hands still on the keys, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. She had given everything she had to that performance, and now she felt both completely empty and completely full at the same time. The wealthy man stared at her with his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just witnessed. This wasn't what he had planned when he made his casual challenge. He had expected to embarrass a waitress and create a moment of entertainment. Instead, he had just experienced one of the most beautiful performances of his life. For 30 full seconds, nobody in the restaurant moved or made a sound. They were all processing what they had just heard, trying to understand how someone they had dismissed as just a waitress could create something so incredible. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. The first person to clap was an elderly man sitting alone at a corner table. His applause started slowly, deliberately, like he was clapping for something sacred. Then the woman at table 12 joined in, still wiping tears from her eyes. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause that seemed to shake the walls. People weren't just clapping politely like they would for background music. They were on their feet, applauding with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Broadway shows or symphony concerts. The sound was thunderous, filled with genuine appreciation and amazement. Lisa remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Her hands were still trembling, not from nervousness this time, but from the emotional intensity of what she had just experienced. She had poured her entire soul into that performance, and the audience had felt every note. The wealthy man stood up from his table, but his usual confident swagger was gone. He walked toward the piano slowly, almost cautiously, like he was approaching something he didn't quite understand. His expensive suit and flashy watch suddenly seemed unimportant compared to what he had just witnessed. That was, he started to say, then stopped. For someone who was used to commanding boardrooms and making million-dollar decisions, he seemed at a loss for words. How long did you study music? Lisa looked up at him through her tears. 15 years, she said quietly. I started when I was 5. I had a full scholarship to the conservatory, but I had to leave to help my family. The applause was finally dying down, but people weren't returning to their meals. Instead, they were gathering around the piano area, wanting to be closer to Lisa and to understand what had just happened. A well-dressed woman approached with tears still fresh on her cheeks. I haven't heard Rachmaninoff played like that since I was a child, she said. My grandmother used to play that piece. You brought back 30 years of memories in 15 minutes. An older gentleman in a business suit stepped forward next. I'm a music critic for the city newspaper, he said, pulling out his business card. I've been reviewing concerts for 20 years, and what you just did, that belongs on a stage, not in a restaurant. Lisa stared at the business card like it was written in a foreign language. Music critics didn't talk to waitresses. They reviewed famous pianists in fancy concert halls, not people like her who served soup and salad for a living. The wealthy man was still standing nearby, watching the interaction with a confused expression. This wasn't how his challenge was supposed to end. He had expected to embarrass someone and create a funny story for his social media. Instead, he was witnessing what looked like the discovery of a major talent. "Why aren't you performing professionally?" asked a middle-aged woman who had been dining with her husband. "That level of skill? You should be playing with orchestras." Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "It's complicated," she said. "My little brother has been sick for 2 years. The medical bills are enormous and my mom can't work enough hours to cover everything. Someone had to take care of the family." The crowd around the piano grew quiet. These people were used to thinking about money in terms of investments and luxury purchases. The idea of giving up a career to pay medical bills was something many of them had never had to consider. The wealthy man cleared his throat. "What kind of medical treatment does your brother need?" Lisa hesitated. She didn't want to turn this into a pity party or make people uncomfortable with her family's problems. But something in his voice made her answer honestly. "He has a rare blood disorder," she explained. "The treatments are experimental and expensive. Insurance covers some of it, but not nearly enough. We've been doing everything we can, but it's not enough." The music critic was scribbling notes on the back of a napkin. "Have you ever considered applying for performance grants? There are foundations that support musicians in difficult situations." "I tried," Lisa said, "but most of them require you to be currently enrolled in school or actively performing. When you're working 60 hours a week just to pay bills, there's no time for auditions or applications." The wealthy man was listening to every word, and his expression was changing. The arrogant smile that he had worn all evening was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. A young couple approached the group. "We're both musicians," the woman said. "We play in the city orchestra. What you just did up there, that's conservatory-level performance." "That's better than conservatory level." Her boyfriend nodded enthusiastically. "I've been playing piano for 12 years, and I couldn't play that piece half as well as you just did. You have a gift that most people spend their whole lives trying to develop." Lisa felt overwhelmed by all the attention and praise. For months she had been invisible, just another waitress bringing food to tables and cleaning up messes. Now suddenly, all these people were treating her like she mattered, like her music mattered. The restaurant manager appeared at the edge of the crowd, looking nervous and confused. He wasn't sure if he should be happy about all the attention or worried about the disruption to normal business. The kitchen staff was still standing in the doorway, abandoning their duties to watch the scene unfold. "I don't understand," said one of the wealthy man's friends, finally joining the conversation. "If you're this talented, why are you working as a waitress?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Lisa felt her face flush again, this time with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. "Because talent doesn't pay medical bills," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Because my brother needs treatments that cost more than most people make in a year. Because sometimes you have to choose between your dreams and your family, and family always comes first." The crowd around the piano fell silent again. These people lived in a world where talent was usually rewarded, where hard work led to success, where dreams could become reality if you just wanted them badly enough. Lisa's story was a reminder that life didn't always work that way. The wealthy man stepped closer to Lisa, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all evening. "What's your brother's name?" he asked. "Tommy," Lisa replied, wondering why he wanted to know. "And how old is he?" "He's 12. He should be playing soccer and video games like other kids his age, but instead he spends half his time in hospitals." The wealthy man nodded slowly, processing this information. Around them, the other customers were starting to return to their tables, but many kept glancing back at Lisa with expressions of respect and sympathy. The music critic approached Lisa one more time. "I meant what I said about that business card," he told her. "When you're ready to perform again, really perform, call me. The city needs to hear what you can do." As the crowd dispersed, Lisa found herself alone at the piano with the wealthy man and his group. The challenge that had started the evening felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. Everything had changed in the space of one song. The wealthy man stood in front of Lisa for a long moment, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. His friends had returned to their table, but he remained by the piano, lost in thought. The arrogant businessman who had walked into the restaurant a few hours earlier seemed like a completely different person. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice much quieter than it had been all evening. "I came here tonight planning to make a fool out of someone. I do this kind of thing all the time, challenge people, put them on the spot, see them fail. I post videos online and my followers love it." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected something like this, but hearing him admit it made her feel sick. "But what you just did," he continued, shaking his head slowly. "I've never heard anything like that. And hearing about your brother, about what you've sacrificed, I feel like the biggest jerk in the world." Lisa didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to be angry at him for treating her like entertainment, but she was too exhausted from the emotional performance to feel much of anything, except drained. "I want to help," he said suddenly. "I want to pay for your brother's treatments, all of them, and I want to help you get back to music school." Lisa stared at him in shock. What? No, that's not. I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I don't want charity," Lisa said, finding her voice. "I don't want to be your next social media project or your way of feeling better about yourself." The wealthy man's face flushed red. "That's not what this is, isn't it?" Lisa stood, up from the piano bench, finally meeting his eyes directly. "You came here to embarrass me and now you want to rescue me? That's not how life works." The conversation was attracting attention again. Other customers were pretending to eat while actually listening to every word. Lisa's manager was hovering nearby, clearly torn between wanting to keep his wealthy customer happy and protecting his employee. "You're right," the wealthy man said after a long pause. "I did come here with terrible intentions, but what happened tonight changed something in me. That music you played, it reminded me of why I fell in love with creating things in the first place, before I got caught up in money and power and stupid games." Lisa could see that he was struggling to find the right words. For someone who was used to having all the answers, he seemed genuinely lost. "I started my first company because I wanted to build something beautiful," he continued. "Something that would make people's lives better. Somewhere along the way I forgot about that. I forgot about the people behind the numbers and the stories behind the statistics." A middle-aged woman at a nearby table was openly crying as she listened to their conversation. The elderly man who had started the applause was nodding his approval. Even the kitchen staff was still gathered in the doorway, caught up in the drama. "So what are you saying?" Lisa asked. "I'm saying I don't want to just write you a check and walk away feeling good about myself. I want to do something real, something that matters." Lisa sat back down on the piano bench, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't understand." The wealthy man pulled out his phone, but instead of checking messages or social media, he opened his notes app. "I've been thinking while you were talking to all those people, what if we started a foundation? Not just for you, but for other people like you. Talented musicians who had to give up their dreams because of family emergencies or financial problems." Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. "A foundation? We could provide scholarships, help with medical bills, create opportunities for people to perform and be discovered. You could help run it. You understand what these people are going through because you've lived it." The restaurant had gone quiet again, but this time it was because everyone was straining to hear the conversation. The music critic had returned to his table but was taking notes on everything he heard. "But I'm just a waitress," Lisa said softly. "No," the wealthy man replied firmly. "You're not just anything. You're one of the most talented musicians I've ever heard, And you've proven that you're willing to sacrifice everything for the people you love. Those are exactly the qualities we need in someone who's going to help other people. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. But what about Tommy? What about my family's bills? That's where we start, he said. We make sure your brother gets the best treatment available, and we make sure your family doesn't have to worry about money while he's getting better. But we do it as part of something bigger. We create a system that helps families like yours, not just once, but ongoing. The manager finally approached their conversation. Excuse me, he said nervously, but we're supposed to close in an hour, and how much would it cost to rent this place for a benefit concert? The wealthy man asked suddenly. The manager's eyes went wide. A benefit concert? Lisa could perform. We could invite other musicians, sell tickets, raise money for the foundation. This is where it all started tonight. This should be where we launch something that could help hundreds of people. Lisa felt like she was in a dream. A few hours ago, she had been worried about making enough in tips to buy groceries. Now this man was talking about foundations and benefit concerts and changing people's lives. I need time to think about this, she said. Of course, the wealthy man replied. But while you're thinking, let me take care of your brother's next treatment. No strings attached. Whether you decide to work with me or not, no child should have to suffer because his family can't afford medical care. The music critic approached their table again. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but I couldn't help overhearing. If you're serious about this foundation idea, I'd like to help spread the word. Tonight's performance deserves to be heard about. Other customers began approaching as well. The woman who had been crying offered to donate. The young musician couple volunteered to help organize events. Even some of the restaurant staff said they wanted to be involved. Within 30 minutes, what had started as a cruel challenge had turned into an impromptu planning session for a charitable foundation. Lisa found herself at the center of it all, still wearing her waitress uniform but being treated like the important person she was. As the evening wound down and the last customers left, Lisa sat alone at the piano one more time. She played a simple, quiet melody, something she had written years ago but never shared with anyone. It was a song about hope, about believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The wealthy man sat at his table, listening and thinking about how much his life had changed in just a few hours. He had walked into the restaurant as someone who used his power to embarrass others. He was leaving as someone who wanted to use that same power to lift people up. 6 months later, the Tommy Foundation held its first annual benefit concert at the city's most prestigious concert hall. Lisa performed the same Rachmaninoff piece that had started it all, but this time she was wearing an elegant dress instead of a waitress uniform, and she was playing for an audience that had paid to hear her music. In the audience sat Tommy, healthy and smiling, next to their mother who no longer had to work 3 jobs. The wealthy man was there too, but he wasn't the center of attention anymore. He had learned that the best way to use his influence was to help others shine. The restaurant still had the piano in the corner, and they had added a small plaque that read, "Where music changed everything." Sometimes late at night when the last customers had gone home, staff members would still talk about the evening when a waitress reminded everyone that talent and heart matter more than money and power. And Lisa never forgot the lesson she learned that night, that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfect circumstances but from the courage to share your gifts even when life has knocked you down.